Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm Peter Lavelle. China is in the news in a big way because we have the US presidential election, and both parties have decided to address the China threat in their own ways. But the message is quite muddled because both parties and the captains of industry in general have been working hand in hand with China for decades. And all of a sudden, it has become a very political issue. As we see the Russiagate hoax go into the twilight, though never disappearing, we have the new what will eventually be called Chinagate or something like that. We have James Bradley on this podcast. He's written the best book on it, The China Mirage. I strongly suggest people pick it up. It is a very well written book, and it'll have pearls of wisdom that you probably have never come across. And I tend to pride myself of being a good historian, and I learned a lot from this book here. We have James Bradley and we have George Samueli. James, what is China's role in this election? Because, we've heard, China's decided to back Biden. Okay. I think the Chinese and the Russians are quite alike. They're going to have to deal with whoever comes into office, and they plan for both contingencies, but hardly ever favoring anyone. Go ahead, James. What's your take?
My take is that if I was running for president, I would demonize China. It's one of the few things the Democrats and the Republicans can agree on, number one. Number two, Americans, very few Americans have ever been across the Pacific to China. Yes, Uncle Joe went on a Yangtze River cruise about 3 years ago, but I give speeches across the country, and mothers say, "Oh, my daughter's going to school overseas," and I say, "Where? Burma?" No, it's London or Rome or Paris, and we Americans really have not had much historical contact with China, and China is the entity, is the imagination, is the mirage that we love to hate. So I don't think it's as much the politicians as the American public who will react to all this anti-China talk.
Yeah, but James, is it warranted? I mean, you said that this is an issue that they both have in common, but okay, I would agree with that, but I'm not sure if it's for the right reasons. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced it isn't for the right reasons, okay? China has been able to modernize and industrialize at an amazing pace, and they have American companies wholeheartedly going into the Chinese market and doing what they want. Okay, I mean, Chinese companies are major shareholders in the United States. Russian companies aren't here. I mean, all of this was easy to see if you had your eyes open here, and particularly with when we had the pandemic. George, it's convenient to blame China because the U.S.'s reaction to the coronavirus, to the pandemic, is one of the worst in the world because of the healthcare system that they have. But of course, it's China's fault that they don't have masks readily available to the population. It's China's fault that America doesn't have any antibiotics. I mean, really, China's a fierce competitor. They learned the rules and do it well. And now they're being demonized for doing that. What do you think, George?
Well, I think that there are some legitimate grievances that the United States can raise against China. I think the origin of the virus is a legitimate area of inquiry. There should be some international inquiry about how this came about, because this isn't the first coronavirus that emanated from China and has afflicted everyone else. And we need to find out how this happened and to prevent such an eventuality again, because we can't just simply shut whole economies down every 10 years. So I think that's a legitimate grievance. The rest of the arguments against China, I think, are very implausible. China has succeeded economically. As you say, it's the corporations that have gone to China because this is a source of cheap labor. There is a limited amount of regulations, and this is they can make a ton of money thereby. And similarly with the human rights issues, there's absolutely no point in raising with China the issues of Hong Kong or the issues of the Uyghurs. China will not tolerate any kind of interference in its own internal affairs. It guards its sovereignty jealously, and this is an absolute waste of time for Washington to do. So the problem with all these attacks on China is that some have some legitimate basis, but many have no basis.
Yeah, but I mean, again, let's take it at face value. China's at fault for this and that. One, two, three, A, B, C. The thing is, what do you do, James? What do you do? I mean, there's a lot of bluster, a lot of hot air, but I don't see, outside of Trump tinkering with trade agreements, I don't see a whole lot being done, because at the end of the day, politicians, including the president of the United States, answer to donors, to big money. And that's how decisions are made. I mean, for months and months, there was a Buy America executive director on Trump's desk, and he wouldn't sign it. I think we all know why, because the donors called and said, don't do that. You'll hurt my economic interests. See, these people are more interested in their own personal bottom line than the protection of American workers. I think that's obvious. James.
That's obvious. But, George said implausible, and we're saying it's illogical, and some of the attacks on China don't make sense. But, in a divorce, we could argue about the bed and the chairs and the table, but that's not what it's about. You said something about my mother. There's something very, very deep here and emotional. And I'd like to read you the emotion, because there's a historical cycle here that we have to realize. In the 1930s, a Democrat cozied up to the Chinese, and the rationale was they're going to be just like us. You can read Pearl Buck, you can read Time magazine, look at the front page of the New York Times, the China Mirage. The Chinese, for just a few $1 billion more, are going to be just like us. There's going to be churches on the hills and potluck dinners every Sunday night. And then Mao arose and said China's going to be just like China. And that was the source of McCarthyism, was based in China. It later morphed over to Russia. But Joe McCarthy, when he first said we're being scammed from the inside, he was holding the names of State Department's people who knew Mao Zedong. That was the crime, even knowing China. So let's go back to emotion. Let me read this. This is Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor. So Pompeo had O'Brien and the FBI's Wray and Attorney General Barr and all these people, and they talked about, they're rolling out the anti-China rationale. So Robert O'Brien, National Security Advisor, the Henry Kissinger to Donald Trump, said, for decades, the conventional wisdom in both political parties was that it was only a matter of time before China would become more liberal, first economically and then politically. Now, who made that up? These are American experts on China. The more we open the market to China, the thinking went, the more we invested capital in China, the more China would become like us. National Security Advisor. Unfortunately, it turned out to be very naive. We could not have been more wrong. This mass calculation was the greatest failure of American foreign policy since the 1930s. How did we make such a mistake? How did we fail to understand the nature of the Chinese Communist Party? The answer is simple. It's because we did not pay heed to the Communist Party's ideology. Instead of listening to what Chinese leaders were saying, instead of reading what they wrote in their key documents, we closed our eyes and ears. Folks, I mean, that's it in a nutshell. We did this. In other words, Nixon opened up to China, and we signed all these agreements with China in the 80s and 90s because we were trusting, we were experts on China, and we were trusting they would become like us, and then they didn't. And if you look at Barr's speech, I'm almost done. If you look at Barr's speech, Pompeo's speech, the Washingtonian who you had on the other day with Victor Gao, they all come back to that rationale. We tried to be good. China wasn't good. We've got to do something about it.
Yeah, but that's another mirage, isn't it, George? That it's because this is a neoliberal universalism, and it's flawed. I mean, not everybody wants to be like an American. Okay, sorry, but it's true. I know. I don't want to, calm down and take your heart medicine. And this is the illusion. China is a civilizational project, okay? It's not a modernization project. Okay. And that is the illusion the Americans and the Western world, because they feel that they are morally superior to everyone else. And if others don't emulate them, then they are flawed. Okay. Go ahead.
Can I jump in on that?
Go real quick, George, and then we'll get it, James.
Okay, but this is the liberal illusion that you can replicate over and over again, because it was the same in the case of Russia. Russia, before World War I, it was assumed that Russia would become just like everybody else. Then the Bolsheviks came along and they charted a very different course. We had the same thing after 1991 with the collapse of communism. Oh, we got Yeltsin. Russia would now become just simply an advanced post of the Western liberal order. And lo and behold, within a few years, Russia decided to go its own way. This is a kind of the liberal idea that the whole world will just become like us, with this, limited government and free capitalism and free trade and everything. No, the rest of the world isn't interested in that.
It's not even working in America right now. Go ahead, James. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, that I would just repeat what George said and make the point that for an illusion, it's important that people don't know the true facts. How many have been to Moscow? How many Americans? How many Americans have been to China other than that Yangtze River cruise, hanging out in China, doing business in China? Very, very few. And that's key. And that's why you can maintain the illusion, because there's not that basis of, you know what I mean? You couldn't talk about Canada or the UK in the same bizarre way, because people know something about those countries and have contacts. But with China, pure evil. We gave them a chance. Now we have to be straight. The only thing they understand, force, tariffs.
Yeah, but that is saying, well, that's being a poor loser, because the Chinese basically emulated, backed by the state, absolutely backed by the state. It created markets and created wealth, pulled hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. I don't know why anyone would Beijing want to listen to the swagger of anyone in the American White House at all. We did what you did, and we did it even better. And we're going to continue doing it. As George said, I'm going to go to George now. This is a sovereignty issue. They will never compromise on it. Just like Russia won't. Eventually, India won't. Yeah. Iran doesn't either. Okay, they're not going to compromise their sovereignty. This is what it's about. Go ahead, George.
No, that's exactly right. And in terms of the rise of a rival power, when Germany did this in the 19th century, this also caused indignation, because Germany didn't do it the way the United Kingdom did it. They didn't do it the way the United States did it. They did it with a heavy hand of the state, high hand of tariffs, and so on. Germany became an economic power. And we know what happened there. They wanted to put an end to it. China's done it very differently. China has not gone the United States way or the Western European way. They have become a major economic power through their own method. And there's no point in ranting and raving about this. They're not going to be like America. They're not going to adopt the American model.
I want James to wrap it up here. James, I'm glad George brought up the issue of Germany, okay, because we had a rising power and it ended up being in war. Britain, using the Thucydides trap, basically agreed to allow the United States to surpass it without conflict. But this is the first time in 500 years the West has had a peer that is not Western, as we would define it. And I think there is an element of racism here. How can these people in Asia be more successful than us? And I feel that there's that undertone here. Finish it up for us here. Go ahead, James.
That's really true. China has to maintain their place in the American mind, or else we're very upset about it. And why 1.5 billion people would not logically be more successful than 330 million people? I mean, the numbers are there, and China's working 7 days a week. So it makes sense that China would be number one, but we don't want to tolerate it. And the only thing we have the only lever we have to pull is the military lever.
Okay. I want to thank George Samueli and James Bradley. Buy this book. I hope everyone watching The Goggle enjoyed this. Please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll have much more ahead.